I guess my question to you is, what do you think happens with the food? What do they do with the food that is usable and edible, but didn't sell that day? What do they do? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to guess. Pause this video and guess. I feel like you should know where this is going. They throw it out. That's what they do with it. Hey y'all, welcome in or welcome back to a new video. Today, we have a very interesting topic on our hands. We're talking about wasteful things that brands do that they should stop doing. There's about 5 items on this list, and not everything is created equal. There's some stuff, in my opinion, that's like gross, and there's really easy ways for things to not to be that way. But then there's other stuff that's like, all right, is this the biggest deal in the world? No, but it's still kind of wasteful. It's still stuff that could very easily be not done and, you know, have some longevity, some social environmental responsibility. What's also going to be interesting about this video is talking about things that aren't always consumer facing, which is like stuff that you would never know unless you worked for this company or talked to somebody who's worked for this company. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is how items are shipped to store. And we're going to be talking about clothing, how clothing is packaged to be put onto a store floor. So stuff that's not going directly to consumers, stuff that's going directly to brick and mortar stores. And back in the day, it's not that long ago, but before I came onto this channel, like 2017 to 2018, I worked at a fast fashion company, and they're a Canadian company. So I already feel like you can already narrow it down to a couple of stores. And quite frankly, I think from store to store, like these brands are doing very similar stuff, if not the same. Part of what I did at that store was unpack the clothes to go onto the floor. The amount of waste that is generated in how this stuff is packaged and shipped was astounding to me. And it was something that I brought up at the time. And it was like, thanks, we care about your concern. Like, thanks for raising it. Obviously, nothing happened. I need to describe this for you so you kind of get the extent of what was happening or what happens. And then we're going to do some math to kind of show you that I'm not like insane and picking up stuff that doesn't matter. So each store would be sent items of clothing. And I guess we can talk about how that is quantified as well. So in like a run of clothing, there'd be, let's say, like 8 to 12 pieces, depending on the item. You might get like maybe like 2 extra smalls, 3 smalls, 4 mediums, 2 larges, 2 extra larges. Something was kind of about the ratio. Each individual item, almost regardless of what it was packaged in an individual piece of plastic. All of those things would then be like put together into a secondary thing of plastic. So let's say in your run of t-shirts, there were 12 t-shirts. That'd be 12 individually wrapped packages plus the 13th piece of plastic to put all of those things together. That is how everything came. Do you know how much plastic that is? It's a wild amount of plastic. We were a very small store, very small, like one of the smallest stores in the province. And we generated roughly 5 like extra large trash bags full of plastic waste. And that is just unpacking orders. That's no other waste from the store. Or let's say unpacking shipments. Shoes came the same way, which I think there might be more of an argument for individually wrapping shoes, but also sometimes what would happen with shoes is the left shoe would have one piece of plastic wrapped around it, the right shoe would have one piece of plastic wrapped around it, and then all the pair of shoes would have another piece of plastic wrapped around it. That's how not everything, but that's how some things came. So let's do some math here, folks. So this company has about 300 stores in North America. And if we use this 5 trash bag metric and applied it to every store, granted, there are stores who are double, triple, and quadruple our size, who are using double, triple, and quadruple our waste. So this is conservative. So let's do some math here. Our store has 5 trash bags worth of garbage a week, or just like the unpackaged materials a week. That times 52 weeks is 260 bags of clothing trash, clothing plastic. And whether that does get recycled, we're going to talk about next. So that's 260 bags. If every store produced the exact same amount of waste for this one type of product, that would be 78,000 bags of like clothing packaging waste in 1 year. In 3 years, that's 234,000 bags of garbage. Keeping up with this waste discussion. Number 2 is how bookstores treat books. Lena Norms talks about some stuff that like Amazon does, how they like send books back to book sellers, or not sellers, like publishers, and demand their money back, which is one thing. But one thing that I did not know until I worked at a bookstore is like what happens to unsold books. What do you think happens to unsold books? Leave it in the comment before you keep watching. I would guess that maybe they were sent back to the publisher. That kind of makes sense to me. After what period of time, I don't know. That's not always what happens. My experience, and I worked for a very big bookstore. What they did is they would call, like every on a weekly basis, they would call books. They would like have a list with somebody's job to go on the list and take all the books off the bookshelf that were on this list. They were then had their covers torn off, and like the covers went into one pile and the rest of the books went into the other pile. And this was done so these books would have no monetary value, right? So somebody couldn't resell them, or like there couldn't be a profit made on these books. And then these things were discarded. Does that hurt anybody else's heart? Like we're not only making things unsellable, but then we're also throwing away. Like if you still want to make money, you could, in theory, sell these books to another company, send them back to the publisher. Like there's so much that could be done that's not throw the books out. That doesn't have to be the answer. And it was very shocking to me that that was the answer, because God forbid an employee got their hands on those books, or they were, let's say, put in the dumpsters in the back and somebody rifled through it and found books that they could get for free. Like that leads me into destroying usable returns. All of these books are usable, right? There's things that we could do with them. And part of the reason why stuff isn't done with them is because you're creating secondary markets that's going to cost this company money. And also imagine this, like imagine that these books were like just dumped on the thrift store, which like wouldn't happen, but just imagine that. Like you'd be creating so much, like you'd be giving your problem to somebody else, but like you could also send these books to like book liquidators, where maybe you don't get $0 from them, but maybe like if a book costs $15, maybe they'll buy it from you for $5. There's other things that happen. And the reason why that doesn't happen is because doing those things costs companies more money than destroying the item. BBC estimates that about 5 billion pounds of waste are generated each year through returns. In the US alone, 3.5 billion items are returned approximately. And companies are destroying returns because they do not have the equipment, the capacity, the tools, or the resources in place to process like the volume and the quantity of returns that they receive. According to one stat, about 100 years ago, returns happened at about 2%. Now they're happening at about 20%. From another company, I saw 30%. Like 20 and 30% is still a large quantity. It's a large amount. And it has led some to speculate or argue that the reason why stuff is being made at such poor quantity or quality now is that there's so much being returned. Like consumers aren't even keeping the product. So why bother making them higher quality to begin with? And some of this like returning stuff is happening because of online shopping. Online shopping has made shopping easier and convenient to do than going in brick and mortar stores. And what has happened is people are buying 2 or 3 sizes of stuff. I've done it. You've probably done it. And then you'll keep the item that's of the best size. It's not necessarily people like are just buying stuff mindlessly. Of course that happens. Of course. But I think this argument that like people aren't keeping stuff, so let's make it low quality, is missing kind of some of the consumer behavior that's happening with returns. And I mean, it might seem obvious that you're more likely to keep stuff that you buy in store, not only because you're more likely to try it on, but also you have to physically go back to the store to make the return, which is inconvenient enough for some people to not do it. This was not something that I was thinking about, right? Like, oh, maybe the more sustainable thing to do is to drive to the mall, is to try on the stuff, than to buy it online. But that's still the problem of the returns and companies destroying perfectly usable, resellable stuff. I think it was CNN who was saying that it's only about 20% of all returns that are things that like aren't usable or things that are damaged. So 80% of returns are in good enough state to resell. And I feel like there's going to be somebody in the comments who's going to say something like, what about X thing, right? Like, what about makeup? That's not all of returns. Like, let's not make the entire returns process seem unsolvable or a problem, because there are some areas which are a problem or which more difficult to solve the problem. And the reason why more sustainable avenues aren't being pursued on a wide scale basis is because, according to CNN, processing the average return costs companies 59% of the original sales price, which seems kind of wild that it would be so much. But I guess if you think about it, like the item has to be shipped back to or shipped to a place for it to then be processed, perhaps sanitized, perhaps like somebody has to handle it or a machine has to handle it to decide like, is this resellable? Maybe to repackage it. So doing that is very expensive. And it's like, all right, do I process the return or do I just destroy it? Destroying it is the cheaper of the options. Now, to be fair, there are companies who are trying to create easier ways of having companies do returns, but importantly, do it in more sustainable ways. That costs money. These companies that are popping up to fill this gap aren't doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They want to make money. So it's going to cost somebody money to use these services, and they're not being used because they cost money, because it's cheaper to burn stuff and destroy stuff than it is to develop a robust, sustainable return policy, return program or plan, which in some ways is not surprising given how this stuff is manufactured in the first place. If we don't expect a company to do the right thing at point of manufacturing, why would we expect them to do the right thing at the point of return? It's just like, it's gross because there are options and alternatives that are readily and widely available that are not being used because a company does not want to impact their bottom line like that. Next up is more on waste. Many companies that sell food, I'm thinking more about like the coffee shop that sells food, like places that might sell a donut or a prepackaged sandwich. I guess my question to you is, what do you think happens with the food? What do they do with the food that is usable and edible, but didn't sell that day? What do they do? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to guess. Pause this video and guess. I feel like you should know where this is going. They throw it out. That's what they do with it. Okay, so I worked for a coffee company that sold food. There were changes that were made during my tenure that like move things in the right direction. So let's say you bought a cookie from them. Those kinds of things started being donated to food banks. But the things like sandwiches were thrown in the garbage. There were some supervisors who would let their employees take them home or give them to friends, but that was that was not allowed, strictly prohibited, and whether that happened or not depended on like a shift supervisor or a manager. And here's the thing, these companies will throw out perfectly good food and they'll package them like the food hasn't expired, is what I'm trying to say. The food hasn't expired, but they'll throw them out because they're not in their prime to be sold. So if you have experience working for a retailer or large corporation, large company, and you would like to share your experience, hit me up at my email address. It's shanarapari@gmail.com. It's going to be linked in the description of this video if you want to send me an email, because if you have stuff you want to share, I would love to share it. Also, if you do want to share but want to be anonymous, we can arrange that as well. I would love to hear your stories. Back to the video. I can imagine that other companies that deal with food have food waste, and food waste is something that is so frustrating because it is so easily solvable. Like there's so much we could do about it, and there's so many people within most, if not all, of our communities that are dealing with food insecurity. I also want to talk about the like recycling component of it, or I guess more like waste of these companies. So again, back to my experience with this very large company, during my tenure, they recycled cardboard and only cardboard, but everything else went into the trash. This is already kind of gross. Like we are capable of recycling. My municipality had a recycling program, but what made it even worse is that this company had, I'm sure you've seen it, like you've gone into a store and they have those like circular bins that are divided, right? You'll have one for like maybe cardboard, one for garbage, one maybe for like other types of recycling. They had those, and you had to carefully select which like hole you would drop your product into. They didn't recycle. I mean, is that the most egregious thing? No, but it's so misleading. So misleading. I followed up with somebody who left the company much more recently than I did. And I followed up with them and I was like, hey, do you know the deal with this? Because we worked in the same district and they worked there longer than me and they have more experience working in more districts than me. And so what they said was that every store always did cardboard since they had started working there. And depending on the city, they would have different mandatory participation in recycling programs. They also said that if like recycling happened would depend on property management. So the stores that I worked at, our municipality had recycling programs, but the lack of facility wasn't up to the city. It was because of property management. Property management did not put in or want to pay for the proper equipment in order, or not just the proper equipment, they didn't want to pay for recycling to happen. Discrepancies as to like who pays for it, because sometimes a tenant doesn't want to pay for recycling. So if the tenants aren't paying for recycling and the property manager doesn't want to pay for it, it's not going to happen. I was also told that many times output would be greater than the capacity. So if their equipment or their current facility couldn't hold enough material or it was full, then it would go into the garbage. And that's something that's fairly easily fixable. If you know that like your current setup every week is not enough, you can arrange for multiple pickups. But this, of course, doesn't happen because it costs money. And so this person, they work for another company that is in food, I would say, or they sell food. And so this company sells more food and in greater quantities than the original company we were talking about. And what they said is that they have way less waste, like significantly less waste than the first company we were talking about. And this kind of like this company is more sustainably minded. And so how they package and ship things, less waste. What they do with their waste. There are ways to be sustainable if you look for it. And the second company is much smaller than the first company. The first company has stores around the world. The second company is largely just a Canadian store. I think what this kind of illustrates is consumers have their own set of problems, but also so do corporations. One like Tim Hortons or one Starbucks or one McDonald's is going to produce more waste than like an average household. And so managing these kinds of wastes are not things that like we as consumers tend to talk about or even think about. And this is such a big part of the sustainability problems, like holding corporations accountable. You know, like corporations, they're not going to do the right thing out of the goodness of their hearts. They often have to be forced to do the right thing. This is just like part of the problem, right? Like even if we look at one corporation, let's talk about H&M. They're a company that is doing a lot to drum up interest in fashion, keep the cycle fast, like keep production unethical and unsustainable. Then they also have disposal problems on top of that. Like they have both sides of the coin. So not only is it consumption that's a problem, it's also waste and waste management that's a problem. So the last thing I want to talk about is kind of two things, but they just feel very similar that it seems right to talk about them together. That would be like swag, stuff you give at like conferences, but also potentially new hires. Also, I remember when I was in Welcome Week or like, Frosh Week, there would just be like random shit that like you would be given. Like we were given laundry bags or tote bags or those. I feel like everybody and their mom at conferences and stuff, they'll give you that like really cheap metal water bottle and you're like, why? New companies might do this for new hires too. I've also been hired at companies where I was given the little metal water bottle and like a little drawstring, those drawstring kind of bags. And then you also have, this is like the largest companies will do like a lot of commemorative t-shirts or swags for their employees, like a holiday t-shirt, or if they're running a sale. I'm kind of thinking about like maybe Target, Walmart, maybe like Starbucks. I don't think Tim Hortons really does this, right? They'll do commemorative t-shirts, sale t-shirts, holiday t-shirts, that kind of stuff. It's less popular now, but when I worked at some of these companies 8 to 12 years ago, this kind of stuff was happening all the time. Yeah, so sometimes corporations will hand them out on these special days and they'll be like, yeah, keep it. When am I ever going to, in real life, wear your special holiday promotional t-shirt? It's kind of stuff like that. Like when you think about a store, like a company, let's say, so we'll use Starbucks as an example, because this is one of the companies that I've seen this at. Starbucks in the US only has approximately 17,000 stores. So let's say on average, an average store has 15 employees. So there's more than 250,000 people in the US alone that would work for Starbucks. 256,020 people. Approximately every store had 15 employees. That's so much. Right? And even if you take the example of waste that I was talking about from the first example, like unpackaging goods and stuff, like if each Starbucks store produces 2 bags of garbage at like, we're talking 17,000, 35,000 bags of garbage. Sorry, 34,136 bags of garbage. I can understand how consumers can really feel like, oh, an individual action for me seems so small. But you talk about one company like Starbucks, who, let's say they gave every person a water bottle, every person a t-shirt. It's so much, like it's truly so much waste that can happen. And also like we're giving people stuff that they don't need. I'm not saying that they have given employees all of them t-shirts and all of them water bottles, but such large quantities are produced for staff, giving them shit that they don't want or will never use. This isn't even talking about stuff like store signage. I've worked at many a company. Signage changes on a monthly, if not bi-weekly level. Are these signs reused? No, they don't. Because you have, this is a small tangent. You can click off now if you want to, but you have promotional campaigns that happen every year. I'm picking on Starbucks, I guess, right now because I have a lot of knowledge about Starbucks. But every year they have the same but different holiday campaign, right? Like they have almost the same flavors, but they'll change up their holiday menu slightly. And they also will change up like their design for their cups every year. So that also changes a lot of the logo and the branding that a company will bring in for their like holiday releases. And that impacts the signage that they have and the packaging for their holiday products. So now we have 17,000 stores who all are getting brand new logo and signage for the holiday time every year. I feel like I just need to stop at this point because there's like almost a never-ending amount of waste that happens with companies and with corporations. And I know that this can lead us down this road of there's no good company. Like there's nothing we can do. Everybody sucks. Let's not go down that road because that can lead us into being jaded and kind of feeling complacent. Like it all sucks, so I'm going to do nothing. We all have different access to resources, right? And resources being things like time and money, which influences things like cars and what grocery stores you are able to do your shopping at and what kind of coffee you can afford. So I'm not saying like everybody needs to do the exact same thing, but there are things that many of us can do. And I think like on an individual level, you might say like, oh, my purchasing power doesn't really matter. Purchasing power does matter. But like, even if you're the only person who makes a change, if you, let's say, go to your local bookseller, you're really making a difference in like an individual person's life, which is kind of incredible. I don't know, maybe we need to start a lot of writing campaigns to H&M, or maybe we like, I encourage you in this moment to not give up. So this is my second call to, if you have stories from your experience working for a retailer or a corporation, email them to me. This is stuff that I think sometimes the impact of education is a bit overblown, and this is an example where there's no way for us to really know what's happening behind the scenes unless somebody from behind the scenes tells us. Because I wasn't thinking about how much waste a company was producing in the shipping of their materials and the packing of their materials until I worked for a fast fashion company. So let us know in the comments. Let us learn. All right, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for hanging around and being here today. Appreciate you, all your comments, all your likes, and while you're at it, subscribe to catch more content like this because we have lots of conscious consumer content coming your way. Bye.
I think there's a night